You know it's the final saga of One Piece when Luffy is bending reality itself and Zoro is cutting through giants. But here's the thing most people aren't paying attention to. The rest of the Straw Hats are also about to evolve in ways that might completely redefine how the crew fights at the highest level. Today I'm skipping Luffy and Zoro entirely because right now the gap between the top tiers and the rest of the crew still exists, but Oda has already planted the seeds for every single Straw Hat to bridge that gap. So if you've been paying attention to the patterns, the themes, and the subtle hints across arcs, you can actually see where this is going. And before we dive in, if you enjoy this kind of breakdown where I connect canon details to future possibilities, consider subscribing. Sanji is already one of the strongest Straw Hats, and while a Conqueror's Haki buff is definitely on the way, what makes his future power-up interesting is that it doesn't come from strength, it comes from emotion. In Egghead, he literally blocked Kizaru's light by saying his power of love was stronger. And Oda has confirmed through SBS that in One Piece, logic love can act as a force separate from Haki, but that creates a problem. How do you scale something like that in a final war? The most likely direction is that Sanji's emotions become an actual combat amplifier, turning his compassion into durability, speed, and even resistance to abilities like light or heat. I think this theory makes even more sense with Scopa-Gaban's introduction in El Baf. Sanji and Gaban mirror each other as the left-hand men of their respective Pirate King crews, both occupying the third strongest position behind the captain and right hand, forming a clear generational parallel. But beyond hierarchy, recent chapters highlight personality and thematic similarities, with Gaban being described as a missionary of love, directly echoing Sanji's defining trait of fighting through emotion and compassion, which aligns with Sanji's canon power of love moments. Both are also portrayed as versatile fighters rather than pure brute force combatants, relying on speed, technique, and adaptability, suggesting Oda intentionally designed Sanji as the modern reflection of Gaban. Additionally, Sanji also rejected his Germa enhancements, choosing humanity over his stealth black power. Therefore, the final saga may force him to accept both sides of himself, combining his emotions with his genetic potential instead of suppressing it, which could push his flames beyond Ifrit Jamba into something closer to Lunarian-level fire manipulation, as hinted by Queen during their fight. However, Oda should not give Sanji a devil fruit or turn him into a generic, overpowered flame user, because that completely undermines what makes him unique. Sanji wins fights not because he's the strongest, but because he refuses to lose himself. Nami has always been underestimated in combat, but that's only because people treat her abilities as tools instead of power, because Zeus, Big Mum's own soul fragment, is now fully under her control, but that creates a ceiling problem. If Zeus stays as he is, Nami plateaus. Therefore, the only logical progression is that Zeus evolves alongside her, possibly awakening into something that lets Nami control entire weather systems, instead of just localized lightning or rain. But there's another detail most people overlook. Nami's weather prediction has always been unnatural, and some theories suggest it's actually a form of observation haki disguised as meteorology. Therefore, in the final saga, Nami might not just control storms, she might sense the battlefield itself, predicting attacks through atmospheric shifts rather than intent. Having said that, I don't want Oda to turn Nami into a second Big Mum by stacking multiple homies or giving her a weather devil fruit, because her strength has always been precision and intelligence, not overwhelming force. Usopp is the clearest case of unrealized potential because he unlocked observation haki in Dressrosa and then barely used it again, but that's exactly why Elbaf and future arcs matters so much, because his entire character arc is about becoming a brave warrior of the sea, but he still relies on lies and luck. Therefore, his true power-up shouldn't just be haki, but also belief, because once Usopp fully trusts himself, his observation haki logically evolves into long-range predictive sight, allowing him to track targets across massive distances and anticipate movements before they happen, turning him into a sniper on the level of Yonko crews. At the same time, his weapons need to evolve too. Pop greens alone won't cut it in the final war or against Van Auga. Therefore, combining them with haki or advanced materials could turn his arsenal into something far more lethal. But Oda should not solve Usopp's growth by simply giving him haki and calling it a day, because that's boring and lazy writing in my opinion. I believe Usopp's fights should always feel creative, desperate, and earned. Robin already showed one of the most terrifying abilities in Wano with Demonio Fleur, but here's the key detail. That wasn't her awakening, but it looked like it, therefore her actual awakening has to go even further. Because awakened paramecia users affect the environment, Robin could potentially make entire battlefields bloom, creating limbs, clones, or even giant forms across the surroundings, turning space itself into her weapon. An awakened version could remove her biggest weakness by making her constructs independent or semi-independent, reducing damage transfer to her main body and allowing her to fight at scale without risk. Combined with her already established ability to restrain multiple enemies instantly and ignore speed differences by spawning limbs directly on targets, this evolution would transform her from a versatile fighter into a battlefield-dominating controller. But that introduces another issue. Robin currently lacks confirmed Haki, therefore to compete at the highest level, she likely needs at least armament Haki to reinforce her attacks and observation to manage her clones in combat. On the flip side, Oda should not give Robin random abilities like Conqueror's Haki bursts just to scale her up, because her strength should mainly come from her Devil Fruit's logic and her intelligence. Brook's power has always been treated like a gimmick, but it's actually one of the most conceptually dangerous in the series, because he doesn't just control his body, he controls his soul, but so far that ability has limits. Therefore, the only meaningful evolution is an awakening that expands his influence over other souls. Because if Brook can already freeze souls and leave his body, an awakened version could allow him to interact with life and death itself, storing souls, releasing them, or even interfering with the moment someone dies. Importantly, this would not make him a raw damage dealer like Zoro or Luffy, but rather a support control entity at the highest level, someone who can bypass physical durability entirely by targeting the soul directly. That aligns with theories of him becoming a Grim Reaper figure in the final war, guiding souls rather than just fighting physically. But Oda should not turn Brook into a full resurrection machine, because that breaks tension instantly. His power should stay eerie, not omnipotent. Frankie's biggest limitation has always been his energy source, but Egghead introduced Super Vega Cola, which massively boosts his output. But that creates an opportunity. If his fuel improves, everything improves. Therefore, Frankie's next evolution isn't just himself, it's his machines. Because with Vegapunk's technology and Elbaf resources, Frankie could realistically upgrade General Frankie into something approaching ancient weapon-level firepower, or even enhance the Thousand Sunny itself into a battle-capable vessel. But Frankie also lacks Haki, therefore integrating either Haki or Sea Stone into his tech could finally allow him to fight Devil Fruit users at the highest level. Still, the worst thing Oda could do is turn Frankie into a generic Iron Man clone, so I hope that doesn't happen. Chopper is another Straw Hat Devil Fruit user without an awakening, but his fruit is the human fruit, which already raises questions, because what does it mean for a reindeer to awaken a human fruit? But that's exactly where things get interesting. Therefore, his awakening likely isn't about combat. It's about evolution. Because Chopper's dream is to cure every disease, his awakening could allow him to manipulate biology itself, accelerating healing, reversing damage, or even restoring broken minds like Kuma's. We have already seen glimpses of this in Elbaf, with him curing the Domi Reversi giants, but that also opens the door to new forms. Possibly mythical transformations tied to nature or healing rather than destruction. Oda should not turn Chopper into a permanent monster or remove the limitations of Rumble Balls entirely, because his balance between vulnerability and strength is what makes him compelling in my opinion. Jinbe is already one of the most complete fighters in the crew, but his growth doesn't come from gaining new powers. It comes from refining what he already has, because Fishman Karate already lets him manipulate water as a weapon, but that's still limited by range and scale. Therefore, combining it with advanced armament Haki like Ryuo could allow Jinbe to project force without contact, which means Jinbe wouldn't just hit harder, he could control the battlefield itself, using water particles in the air or the ocean around him to attack indirectly. In this case, more than any, I think less is more, and Oda should not change his fighting style, because his identity is tied to mastery and control, rather than transformation. The Straw Hats are heading into a war that will reshape the world, but while Luffy and Zoro will stand at the front, the rest of the crew can't just stand still, and they'll need to evolve alongside them. The final saga isn't just about one pirate king, it's about a crew that becomes worthy of standing at the top together. And if Oda sticks to what he's always done, building power through character specificities, not shortcuts, then every single one of these power-ups will feel earned. So the real question isn't if they'll grow, It's how far Oda is willing to push them before the story ends. And when that moment finally comes, the world won't just fear Luffy. They'll fear the entire crew.